excited to be here in Texas, excited to be in front of a live studio audience. I was joking around, I was speaking at another event on Thursday morning, another virtual event, and I was joking with the kind of virtual moderator about, like, I hope I don't look up at some point during the talk and be like, hey, could you mute yourself? Ooh, that's a Zoom thing, sorry, live room, wasn't really sure. I'm gonna get rid of this. Okay. So we're going to talk about using the Threat Modeling Manifesto to build an enterprise threat modeling program. So just a tiny bit of background about me. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Security Journey. So we focus on security education and security belt programs. I've been running around the world of security for quite a while now, almost 25 years. I spent 10 years of that time at Cisco. I did a number of things at Cisco, building education, but also rolling out Cisco's threat modeling program in the very early days. So a lot of my experience comes from the trenches of trying to figure this stuff out and do it at scale at a really big company. I'm also the co-host of the Application Security Podcast. So I know not a great marketing name, but you do know exactly what you're going to hear if you tune in. We've done 170 episodes with the likes of Matt Tesaro, for example, pretty famous guy in the room here. It's just because he's been on the podcast, you know. But yeah, check it out. It's, it's just, I talked to lots of people from OWASP, lots of different project leads, talked to Matt in the Defect Dojo context, trying to understand what is this project, what can it do for your AppSec program. I'm also a big fan of Twitter, so you can always hit me up there as well. You'll find me at EdgeRoute or the podcast address as well. So here's how I'm going to use my time today, and I want to make this very interactive as well, and I want to leave a lot of time for questions at the end. But I want you to first understand this thing called the Threat Modeling Manifesto. So I'm going to introduce that to you and tell you a little bit of the backstory about how we got there. Then I'm going to walk through the values and principles of the Threat Modeling Manifesto, talk about some of the patterns and anti-patterns that this group of people put together in this document. And then I'll give you some of my perspective on how can you build an enterprise-grade threat modeling program, some tips and things that I've just learned over time, and I've shared those with different people, and they've been able to put those into action. So one of the challenges that a lot of people face with threat modeling, now the challenge is not the fact that we want to do threat modeling, right? Like most people are like, oh yeah, we need to do threat modeling. The challenge I hear from a lot of people is, where do we start? What is threat modeling? How do we get this thing to scale to a point where we've got everybody doing it? It's easy to teach 2 people how to threat model. Teaching 1,000 people how to threat model and getting them to do it on a regular basis is a lot bigger challenge. So how many people in the room right now are doing threat modeling as AppSec people? Okay, do we have any developers in the room? Okay, a couple developers as well. Okay, have you done threat modeling as a developer? Yeah, okay, cool, all right. So let's dive in and kind of explore this topic in a little more depth. So the Threat Modeling Manifesto is a group of us came together, oh boy, about 1.5 years ago now. A bunch of people that had done threat modeling at a lot of different places. We have some people on this list who are academic folks, we have consultants, we have authors. Somehow I got my name on the list. This is what happens if you start a group and invite a bunch of really smart people. They let you stay at the party after you bring them to the party. But like if you look up a threat modeling book on Amazon, likely one of the names on this list is going to appear as the author. You know, Izar Tarandosh and Matt Coles and Adam Shostak and Brooke Schoenfeld, a lot of people that have written a lot about this topic. And so what we did is we got together and said, how could we bring all of our experience together into one document and try to give people a foundation to understand what is threat modeling, and then what are some of the things that we've seen be successful in doing this at a lot of different levels and scale? And so the document itself is at it's at threatmodelingmanifesto.org. You can go check it out, and I'm going to highlight a lot of pieces of it here, but it was designed to be something you could take as a practitioner and share with your organization as a foundational piece for what we're trying to do. I'm not going to talk about basics of threat modeling very much in this talk, but I will share the definition that we as a group came together. I mean, look at that. There's 15 people on that list. Guess what? This is a very opinionated group of people, especially when it comes to threat modeling. And so this is the definition that we all managed to live with. I'll put it at that. I didn't love it at first, but I've come around. I've started to use it naturally now because it is a good description of what we're trying to do with threat modeling. So when we say threat modeling, this is analyzing representations of a system to highlight concerns about security and privacy. Don't forget that and privacy part. That's really important Threat modeling has been primarily a security thing in the past, and we've got some ways to do it from a privacy perspective now as well, and we need to encourage a lot more of that. But analyzing representations. What's a representation? Representation could be a data flow diagram. It could be a piece of code, threat modeling, in a threat modeling is code type of world. It could be something that's drawn on a napkin, not even a data flow diagram, just a couple of boxes on a napkin, right? That's a representation. But at the end of the day, it's all about what are the security and privacy challenges that we have with this, and what are we going to do about it? And so one of the other things that we all agreed on when we came together is that threat modeling is something that we want to see be for everyone. So I've seen a number of different scenarios for how people roll out threat modeling inside their companies. One way will be, okay, the security team's going to do all the threat modeling. Challenge there is the security team gets a stack, if we had paper printouts, they have a stack of threat models yay high, and they're never going to clear the backlog. That pile's just going to grow bigger and bigger over time. And then I've seen other organizations that say, well, we're going to have the security champions do the threat modeling. They're going to be the ones responsible for this. Well, sure, they can do that. The stack is smaller, but we have the same problem. Because there's more threat models that they can do than, they don't have enough time to do their regular work and try to do threat models as well. And so my expectation when I'm helping people roll out threat modeling is that this is going to be something that everyone is doing across the organization. I want to see a threat model happening where there's a developer, a tester, and a product manager, maybe even a program manager, all coming together, all providing their unique perspectives, because that's really the key to successful threat modeling. And so we also described why. Why did we put this threat modeling manifesto together? Well, we wanted to share the knowledge that we had put together as a group of people with a lot of diverse backgrounds and perspectives. We wanted to inform and educate the industry, take a stab at what this thing is, but also inspire other people such as yourselves that are practitioners to say, I'm going to go make my threat modeling program even better than it is today, or I'm going to use this as a foundational piece to get going and be able to do something with my program. So who's familiar with the 4 key questions? Okay, a couple people. All right, who is the author of the 4 key questions? Adam Shostak, I hate to call him the godfather of threat modeling, but I want to all the time. I hope he never sees this recording. But yeah, so he came up with these 4 key questions. Adam's a great guy, but came up with these 4 key questions, and he let us bring these and drop them into the manifesto since he was a part of it. But this is really, in its essence, the most simple way you can explain threat modeling to anybody. Like I use this all the time to say, there's really 4 simple things we have to consider here when we're doing threat modeling. First of all is we have to answer the question, what are we working on? Okay? Once we establish that scope, then we can say, what can go wrong with that thing that we're looking at? And then we ask ourselves, what are we going to do about it? For me, that is where all of the value in threat modeling comes from. If you don't answer question number 3, everything you did for 1 and 2 is a waste of your time. It is, because I've seen threat models done where there's I'll look at it and there's 100 threats that have been identified and 0 mitigations. And I'm like, you have just wasted 2 to 4 hours of your life. We got to talk about mitigations. We got to talk about how we're going to fix these things and make things better. Then the last key question here is, did we do a good enough job? So retrospective. We're talking about that in the context of DevOps, right? It's all about looking at what we're doing and seeing, hey, are there things we could do differently? We're not blaming anybody, but are there things that we could do differently? We want to do the same thing here from a threat model perspective. We look at what we came up with and we say, did we do a good enough job? Could we have done better in some areas in future threat models? Helps to scope where we go. So benefits of threat modeling according to the manifesto, first of all, recognizing what those things are that can go wrong, right? How many people were in the keynote this morning, in Jeff's keynote? Okay, so when he was talking about threat modeling, and he was saying, like, you got to pinpoint the one thing, and that's the one that everybody should focus on. And so the challenge I had with that as somebody who loves threat modeling is, if I haven't done the whole threat model, how do I know what the one thing is? Right? Like a lot of us in the room that are security people, we live and die this, we love this stuff. We can pick out the one thing. But if you're a developer who's, 2-3 years into your career, can you pick out the one key thing out of the 100 that you need to do? So, so then also pinpointing design and implementation issues for mitigation, and then informing the other phases. That's a big part. A lot of people miss out on that. Threat modeling is something that will help testers when they're further down, and even, hopefully they're doing this in a DevOps world and tests are being written at the same time code's being written and all that. But threat modeling, because it causes you to have to think about the design in such a way, it can help to have other people, it can help to inform those other phases of development as well. And so really when we think about what are you going to do with this, how are you going to use the manifesto, it's really about developing or refining a methodology that best fits your needs. And so when we got together as a group and we said, okay, what is the result of this thing going to be? Right? We could sit and argue about threat modeling for 5 years, and we'd probably still be at it now. We'd be enjoying ourselves, but there'd be nothing that we would share with the industry. And so we said, what we're going to do is we're going to borrow from the Agile Manifesto. So the Agile Manifesto has this list of things that they value. And it's this idea of we value this over this. Both things are good, but the one on the left is better than the one on the right. It's kind of the general idea that we use with values that we borrowed from the Agile Manifesto. And so, value, these are the things that from a threat modeling perspective, they have worth, merit, importance. We think they're things that will bolster your program. If you can establish these things as kind of key benchmarks or things that you're considering. And then when we think about principles from a threat modeling perspective, these are the fundamental truths that we think are going to apply to everybody in every situation. So let's look at the first one, and this is where I want to dive in and spend a lot of our time. So with value number 1 from the Threat Modeling Manifesto, we have, like I said before, it's A over B, a culture of finding and fixing design issues over checkbox compliance. So let's work our way back from right to left here to kind of unpack what we're looking at here. If somebody does threat modeling purely to check the box, now I'm hoping if they're doing it to purely check the box, there is some amount of value. They're following a process, they're going through a series of steps. They're not just writing threat model on a piece of paper and making a check thing and going check. Like they're doing something. From my perspective and from the perspective of those that helped to write this, like that's okay, that has some value to it. It's nowhere nearly as valuable as having a culture where people are like, hey, we're all about finding and fixing design issues. And I've seen that happen in different points in my career. You can get development teams where they're to the point where they understand and really appreciate the ideas of security and what we're trying to accomplish, and they get on board with us, and that's a culture shift, a culture move. And so you want to have that culture where developers are sitting around and they're talking about a particular design, and they're like, let's figure out what the problem is. Let's figure out what the mitigation is to that. How can we find and fix these things? And so, when you're talking about metrics from a threat modeling perspective, using the number of issues that are coming out of this is an interesting metric to keep. The number of issues that are coming out of your threat modeling process that you're using. I used to do this at Cisco. I would keep metrics to say, hey, just let me know, give me a total number of issues that are coming out from a particular threat model that's happening. Because when you start thinking about return on investment, one of the most complicated things to do in the world of security, someone should do a 10-day class on how to calculate return on investment for security. I'd probably go and listen to the first 5 minutes and maybe run out, but because I don't think it'd be that interesting. But we want to, from a metrics perspective, we want to have some type of return on investment, and we can do that by saying, hey, our threat modeling program in the last quarter, there were 278 design time issues that we identified, and we were able to mitigate 212 of them. Right? That's a metric that we can build on top of from this program, because you think about threat modeling, what else are we going to metric? Total number of threat models, that's valuable. In the early days, especially, just the bulk of doing threat models and getting things moving is good, but that's not something that sustains us 5 years in the future. We're doing more threat models than we ever had before. Oh, but we still have more vulnerabilities. Not a great metric. So our second value here is people in collaboration over processes, methodologies, and tools. This is a bit of a tricky one because you're looking at the things on the right going, wait, process, that's kind of important. We got to have a process if we're going to do it in a standard way. Methodologies, yeah, we got to have a structure for how we're showing people how to do this. Tools, we got to try to automate some of this. What we found in our conversations and looking across our collective experiences is we really do value the people in collaboration at the end of the day over any of the things we can do from a set of process steps or, Stride versus Linden versus Pasta versus, I don't know, one of the other, there's lots of different methodologies that people are using out there. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what methodology you're using, what tool you're using, what process you're using, if you don't have the people collaborating together in this threat modeling process. That's been some of the most valuable times I've ever had threat modeling. Like the way that I love to do this is to go in with a development team in front of the whiteboard, and I just start asking a million questions. Some questions I know the answer to, others I have no idea. I'll just ask wild questions, Like, what does that do? What would happen if somebody sent something to that? Would that work still, you think? And so that's, kind of the Socratic method, I guess, of approaching threat modeling. But I think there's a lot of value in investing and teaching the developers, the testers, those people that are doing threat modeling so that they have the knowledge and experience, and then give them the right tools, especially still in the world we're in now, to collaborate and do threat modeling using virtual tools. We did a remote threat modeling session, Adam Shostak and I did, just to try it out to see how it would work using, I think we used draw.io, which is a web-based drawing package. The cool thing is it works like Google Docs does now, where you can be two people working at the same time and you're both seeing all the impacts coming. And so we had a lot of fun with it because we were just kind of curious, trying to see like, how would this even work if we tried to tell people you should do this? And so it was a good experience to see how that comes together, how it fits. So our third value here is a journey of understanding over a security or privacy snapshot. So a snapshot, a threat model that's done once in time still has value. Presuming the analysis is happening, the mitigations are occurring, I still believe there's a lot of value in that. But what we said is that we want to value, and we see a lot more value in somebody going on a journey of understanding. Because for those that have done threat models, like the first time you do threat modeling, you get to the end, and like if you open that threat model up a year or two later, you're like, ooh, what was I even thinking? Like, I didn't have any of the perspective or context and stuff that I do now. And that's okay. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's how we learn. We want to learn threat modeling by doing. But going on that journey with a product or an application over a period of time, you can really see it start to get better and your threat model gets better as you start to learn more and more about how to do the process. You learn more about different threats. Maybe you grow above STRIDE as a methodology and you start thinking up stuff on your own or going to other sources. So, just knowing that threat models in the early days are going to have holes, and that an iterative approach to this is it's going to result in threat models getting better. The threat model of tomorrow is going to be no worse than the threat model of yesterday. It's likely going to be a little bit incrementally better over time. So then our fourth value is doing threat modeling over talking about threat modeling. So I have this rule, and I'm breaking my own rule here, and this just let the record show. For the permanent record, I'm staring at the camera now. I have what I call the 30-minute rule for threat modeling, and that is I'm not normally, unless I'm at LastCon, allowed to talk about threat modeling for more than 30 minutes before we have to do some threat modeling. Because this is something that's it's an experience, right? I can do an 8-hour lecture, and I would be happy to do it, but at the end of the day, on threat modeling, but at the end of the day, the people that are listening to me are going to be like, I don't still really know what I'm supposed to do. I watched him do a whole bunch of examples, and he seems to know what he's doing, maybe, but they're not going to be able to go back to their desk on Monday morning and do their own threat modeling. So doing threat modeling is much more powerful than talking about it. Talking about it's okay. It's not a bad thing. But getting people to go step in front of a virtual whiteboard or a physical whiteboard and go through the threat model process, there's a lot of value in that. So value number 5 is continuous refinement over a single delivery. I talked about a single delivery a little bit in a previous one, but threat models are never done, right? So we value the continuous refinement that's happening as a product, application, or feature matures over time. We're opening those threat models, we're refining them as we make tweaks and add new features and stuff. And so we're ending up with this threat model that's getting better and better all the way until we get to the end of the product lifecycle, and that feature gets end of life, and then we can let the threat model go away at that point. So going through this continuous refinement, though, is a very powerful approach to how we can do threat modeling. So here's the principles, and I said we had values and principles both that we had brought into this conversation. And so when we think about the principles, the first one is just early and frequent analysis. People always say, when should I do threat modeling? Well, yesterday or at the beginning of the time that you were thinking about whatever it is that you're going to build. I'm not going to get mad at anybody who has an existing giant application architecture and they're like, now we want to start threat modeling. That's okay. We got to all start somewhere. But in a perfect world, we are threat modeling a feature at the time that somebody thinks about it as a product manager and they write the user story, and we're going to say we're in an agile world, we're going to our Scrum meeting, we're doing our planning cycle for the next sprint. I want to see some planning hours set aside to do the threat model. That's early and frequent analysis in an agile world. But you can also look at it at the macro level from the perspective of the product lifecycle. Once again, we don't always have the luxury of dealing with a product that has not been released to the public ever or anything like that. That's okay, but early and frequent analysis is always going to be better. Second principle is alignment with development practices and iterations. Often as security people, we look at development and say, let's just kind of put our stuff, just wedge it into all the things that they're already doing. And yeah, we'll give them some new systems. They can just connect with new systems and put the results of threat modeling into this other system we want to use. I know they use Jira all day long. We don't need to use Jira. We're going to use something else to do it. And so for smoother threat modeling integration, aligning with development practices and iterations, like where the developers are working now, that should be where you keep your threat model results. Don't make them do something different. All you're doing is driving more of a wedge and putting up more of a stop sign, more likely that they're not going to move forward with whatever it is that you're asking them to do in this case. The third one is that outcomes are meaningful when they are of value to stakeholders. So who are our stakeholders for a threat model? Well, product managers, executives, program managers, maybe engineering leadership. Those are our stakeholders, and so we have to ensure that whatever we're doing from a threat modeling perspective is providing meaningful results for everyone that's involved in the process. And then really a dialogue is the most important thing. Dialogue is having that collaborative conversation. We still want to document the results of what we do, but it's really about the collaboration. That's really the thing that's driving us here. So then the last two parts of the manifesto are what we call anti-patterns that inhibit threat modeling and patterns that are good patterns for things that'll make threat modeling better. And so for those of you that have done a lot of threat modeling, get ready. You're going to see yourself on the screen here a couple of times. I know I did the first time when I looked at this final list. I was like, oh yeah, I'm guilty of that one, guilty of that one. Didn't do enough of that one that was green. The first one that we have here is the hero threat modeler. Remember, this is an anti-pattern. Don't look at this and go, hey, I want to be the hero threat modeler. I want to go threat model everything my company does. And that's really the idea, is that you can't have, it's not beneficial to have one person do the threat modeling because they don't have the perspective. Like, as a security person, when I sit down with those developers to do that threat model, I really don't understand a lot about what their feature does. If I rely on my own understanding, that threat model is going to be really weak. What makes it strong is I ask lots of questions about how the feature works. Because you know what? They're the expert in the feature. I just am a guy who knows a few things about threats. And so this anti-pattern of hero threat modeler can be where the security team is the hero, the champion is the hero, somebody is the hero that everybody's pointing at saying, that's who should do the threat modeling. And sometimes you can fall into that trap as an individual going, well, I want to be the hero. I want to save the day for everyone. But it's not a scalable practice. And that's why it's an anti-pattern. Second anti-pattern we have here is admiration for the problem. So I won't even ask for a show of hands here as far as who's been trapped in this one before. I know I've been there, Admiration for the problem is where I spend a few more minutes/hours creating this representation of the system that I'm trying to threat model, and I'll get it to the point where it's really a good representation. It's just getting caught up in the problem, which is possible, when we're trying to fix something from an engineering perspective. It's possible to admire the problem too much. Like I said at the beginning, for me, it's all about the mitigations. The problem is great, that's what gets us to the table, but it's about getting to the mitigations. That's where the true value is found. Okay, so our second set here of anti-patterns, the third one here is tendency to over-focus. And so this can play out a couple different ways. Sometimes over-focusing can be, we get so hyper-focused on one piece of a feature that we lose the ability to see the big picture of other things that are happening around what we're trying to threat model. And so we want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that big picture. We also discussed in the process of the manifesto being written, like some people will get caught up on a particular adversary. That'll be how they'll over-focus. They'll be like, nation states, everything for them is nation states. Like every threat they see on there is nation states, which it's good that they're considering that. And in a diverse group of people that are doing threat modeling, I like the fact that, because I'm not thinking all about nation states, somebody's really thinking about it. But in a smaller situation, focusing too much on one adversary can result in, we didn't even think about what a cyber criminal would do with this feature that has a credit card processing engine attached to the back of it. Nation states might not care as much about the ability to process credit card data or cards to see if they're real, but a cyber criminal would. And then our final anti-pattern here is perfect representation. It's another one that I'm guilty of here, of saying like, Just spend a little bit more time. I can come up with more threats. There's got to be more threats. There's got to be more problems with this. Let's just keep churning, keep churning. Challenge here is we get caught in this loop and we never get to an actionable result coming out of this, right? Like we have to time box anything we're doing from a threat modeling perspective so we don't get trapped into this perfect representation where it's like, we just spend a few more hours, we can get it. We'll get it to where it's done, it's perfect. It's never gonna be done, right? Well, since we've been sitting in the room here, somebody's come up with some new threat somewhere that we'll hear about in 6 months, some new type of attack, some new challenge that we're gonna have to deal with as AppSec people. So let's look at a couple of patterns now. So we talked about anti-patterns. These are the what not to do. So let's come back over now to some positive things that can really help your threat modeling program as you move forward. So the first one is taking a systematic approach. So being thorough and having reproducible results by applying the security and privacy things that we're talking about here in a structured manner. So I've seen organizations that have kind of a chaotic approach to threat modeling, where there's really not a structure, there's really not, the guidance is really just, we have to do threat modeling. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, some people are doing one way, some people are doing another way, and so we're ending up with really different results for the same amount of effort, and so a positive pattern here is to take a systematic approach to how we do these things. The second positive pattern is informed creativity. And I don't remember who actually came up with this exact verbiage, but it's brilliant. Allow for creativity by including both craft and science. So yes, there is a science to threat modeling. There's a science to applying the methodology and understanding how it rolls out. But let's also have some craft, some creativity that goes into it. Let's not just say we're only going to consider the stride methodology and then we're going to stop. Let's give people the ability to do some brainstorming. And the way I approach this is I tell people, there is no threat that's off the table here. If you can dream it, I'll write it down. We may decide at the end that there's very unlikely it's ever going to come to fruition. That's okay. But everything is on the table. And some of the creative things that come out of that, you'll end up needing a mitigation for. But what you don't want to do is shut them down by saying, that could never happen. Like when I host a threat modeling session, if someone turns to someone else and goes, you know what, that could never happen. I'm like, whoa, time out. Sorry, you can't make that. Can you prove that could never happen? No? Okay, well then it goes on the board because we want to have that creativity, that creative engine running. And then I talked about varied viewpoints a little bit earlier as well, but having that diverse team is really valuable because product managers see the world differently than developers, than testers. Like we're all coming at this, looking at it differently with different motivations. And product managers have a lot of good insight if you can get them to the table. Invite them in, try to get them there, show them some value coming out of that as well, because that cross-functional collaboration is really powerful. Okay, useful toolkit. I know one of our values was, over process methodologies and tools, but tools, it's a good pattern. Do I recommend that on day one of your enterprise program, you go buy a tool and try to apply it as the way you do threat modeling? No. Because threat modeling is really about the people and the collaboration. And there's a lot of tools I like. I think I even put a tool slide in here. I'll show you some of the ones I like. But for me, I want people to understand the process first, and then you use the tool to get better at executing the process. But if you don't understand the process, you can get lost in the tool that's available. And then the last pattern here is really, putting that theory into practice. So taking those things, looking across the industries, a lot of people that are writing a lot about threat modeling and new methodologies and new strategies and stuff. And so a positive pattern is just staying abreast of all those things and bringing the ones that work that you want to take advantage of into your own program. Okay, so now I've got 10 tips that I want to share with you when I think about what are some things you can do to build a enterprise-grade threat modeling program. So the first one is really choosing a solid process to fall behind. What I'm sharing with you here is the way that I've approached threat modeling. This is the same one I did at Cisco. It's been like 10 plus years since, or more than that, since I rolled out threat modeling there. I still use and speak about the same exact process because I can't think of any way to refine it to make it better. The first kind of piece of this process for me is always scope. Okay, I want folks, because developers are going to have multiple user stories, they may not be able to threat model every user story that's in front of them in this sprint. I want them to be able to quickly be able to look and understand the scope and then understand security relevance and choose the one that's going to have the most bang for the buck. To Jeff's point this morning in the keynote about being able to have that way to look across an entire set of threats in the threat model and then pick the one out that you're like, this is the one we have to worry about the most. That's the same goal that I have in threat modeling as well, is that, we may have some of those scope conversations. I'd love to hear that we have time to do all of them, but I also live in reality. And so I know that that's not always going to be the case. Personally, I like to draw. I like the data flow diagram approach. I'm also I've become a fan of an OWASP project called PyTM. If you haven't seen PyTM, you should check it out. I've known the guys, Izar and Matt, that are behind it for a long time, and I've always heard about it and been like, that's cool. And then let's put the honesty cap on. About a month ago, I actually downloaded it, and played around with it for an example I was doing for something else. I'm like, whoa, this is cool. It allows you to define the threat model as code, and then it generates the data flow diagram for you and generates a list of threats for you based on a database. So very, very cool tool. I know I'm jumping ahead of my own list here, but I'm still a fan of data flow diagrams. I like to see and visualize the way things are connecting, and I find that to be an easier way to, like when I go in front of a whiteboard and I ask a dev, hey, can you just draw me a picture of what you're working on right now? It doesn't have to conform to the data flow diagram standard, whatever that might be. Like, I can work with just boxes and arrows and, just regular whiteboarding stuff. We can threat model that as well. And then for me, analyze is the next step. What are the threats? Mitigate, and then some way to document it. So you got to choose a solid process. The Adam's 4 steps, 4 questions kind of layer very close to what I'm talking about here as well. So it kind of all fits together. But really, from an enterprise-grade perspective, you got to have a good process to work from. So the second tip I have for you is embed threat modeling in the secure development lifecycle well. So I put that well on the end on purpose. Like, we could embed threat modeling in the SDL, and just because everybody's got it in their picture, it's a part of what everybody's trying to do. But to do it well, there's a few other things that I'd like to see you do. One of those is, documenting the process at a high level. So I've kind of got my we are talking about an enterprise grade project here, or program here. If you're working at a smaller startup, that document the process at a high level may be half a page with a picture that just shows people, hey, here's what we're trying to do from a feature by feature perspective when it comes to threat modeling. In a bigger enterprise company, there may be more depth that goes into that. But I want to see the process in a way, because if I'm going to ask people to replicate it and repeat it over and over, I want them to be able to have something tangible to work from. And then the second piece of this is placing the threat modeling artifacts inside of existing deliverables if they exist. So, when I was at Cisco, we were a little more old school. We were still using a whole bunch of different specifications. There was a functional spec, a design spec. There was more documentation that was going into each of the features that were being built by a given developer. And so I went to the templates and said, hey, let's add threat modeling, the results of threat modeling, into an existing template. Now, that was where we were at a particular place in time. That was not in a DevOps, not even in a DevOps universe, right? We were very far away from DevOps and Agile at that point. But I think that we still want to bring threat modeling as close to the feature as possible. So I'll give you an example from PyTM. So if you use PyTM and you have your developers do threat modeling as code, they write this little Python script that defines all the connections and things that are happening with a particular threat model. Why not have them just check that right in with the PR? Add it to the code base with the PR. Store that as part of the code base. Because somebody else is going to need to go make an update to that at some point in the future. And you know what happens if we don't put it in as part of the PR? Hey, where's the threat model for that? I don't know. No idea. It's gone. It's disappeared. So, putting the threat model in the repository is a good place to keep it available for the next people who are going to do stuff with it. And then I already mentioned the third one here. Wherever your developers are, that's where you need to integrate threat modeling. If you're using Jira, integrate your threat modeling process into Jira. Whatever tools you're using, don't give them another tool. I've seen that happen with some different tools in the world, and it's always a challenge because half the people aren't even updating it because it's a tool for a single purpose versus where they're living their lives every day. And so by integrating where they're living their lives, you're going to have a lot better impact. I kind of touched on this one a little bit more, but a couple of times already, but I feel so strongly about it, I threw it in again. the strength of your threat modeling program really comes down to the different perspectives. And that's, I think, what's gotten us into kind of squashed our ability to really have a giant impact with threat modeling over, the history as I've seen it happen has been just not having that diverse collection of champions. Let's call them threat modeling champions that are going to help, move threat modeling forward. Could be that they're your security champions, they're the same people. Could be they're different people. Doesn't necessarily mean they have to be security champions. You could find some people who just really like architecture and doing that type of stuff and, make them a threat modeling champion. Doesn't cost anything to give somebody that label. Okay, so threat modeling coaches, tip number 4. I had a chance to hear from a gentleman who works at a large financial, and we were talking about security champions and just security programs. And he started telling me about this how they have application security coaches on their team. Does anybody here have application security coaches that are part of your program? Okay, just one. Okay, I think it's still a relatively new concept and idea, but I was fascinated by it. The idea with an application security coach is that you have a group of people that are part of your AppSec team, and developers can just reach out and schedule a 1-hour meeting with them. Or a developer can reach out and say, hey, I'm having this challenge, can you consult with me? They're almost like consultants, internal consultants. And as I started to hear about how this had been rolled out in this large financial, I was just fascinated by the idea and said, this is going to become part of what I recommend from a threat modeling perspective as well. So to empower threat modeling coaches, they have to have some how-to guidance, right? You got to invest in them a little bit. You're looking for people that have some natural aptitude that are having success with it, but you also are looking for people that can go deeper with it. And so you're going to need to educate them deeper, but you also want to get these threat modeling coaches to the point where they're multiplying themselves. So that was my general rollout, not with the coaches, but multiplication at Cisco, is I would do a small setting, a small threat modeling instructional session with 8 to 10 people, and then I would just beg them at the end, do me this one favor. Go to some other part, without the people in the room, go to different people in your team and do a threat model with them. And try to replicate what I just did here. And do your best with it, have fun with it, but try to replicate it. And I saw as the knowledge of threat modeling and hands-on abilities with it started to replicate across the organization, because it was more than just me as one individual. I mean, there were 25,000 engineers I was working with. I mean, at the rate of 10 per hour, I'd still be working on it. And I left there 10 years ago or whatever. Right, so we have to magnify the resources that we have available here to make something like threat modeling really pop. Okay, I workshop the teaching of threat modeling. So I talked about my 30-minute threat modeling rule already. That applies to how I teach it in general. But I think one of the things you can do in your enterprise-grade program is have a very hands-on workshop approach to how you introduce people to this. Play by this 30-minute rule. It's tough to do sometimes because you're like, I got more things I want to say. I literally set a timer when I do one of these sessions, and I tell people at the beginning, hey, when the timer goes off, then you can all yell at me because I'm not allowed to lecture anymore. We got to get after it. It's only happened once where I wasn't paying attention and the timer starts going off and people are booing me and stuff in the room. But the idea with the workshop approach, though, is what I try to do is I try to start with a physical threat model. I do something as simple as I have this beautiful picture. I should have put it in the slide. I have this beautiful picture of an English cottage with trees around it and like a meadow off to the side, and it's got like a thatched roof and really kind of, early, hundreds of years ago style cottage. And all I do is I challenge the folks in the first exercise. I say, how are you going to get into that cottage? Imagine sitting on the dining room table is the world's best chocolate cake. How are you going to get into that cottage? And then I split people off into small groups and I let them start going. I give them about 10 or 12 minutes. I bring the group back together and I'm like, all right, group 1, what's the best way you came up with to get into get into the cottage and get the chocolate cake? Okay? And then I kind of play moderator. I'm no longer the teacher. I'm just facilitating the conversation. And what's happening is group 3 is listening to group 1 and go, oh, that's kind of cool how they thought about that. And all this learning is happening and all I'm doing is just emceeing and teeing everybody up. So then in my second example, I go to an alarm system in your house. So now I'm transferring into half real world, half cyber. half network, internet-based. And so I make it like a ring alarm. I didn't put ring alarm on there, but I intend it's like an internet-connected alarm system. So there's physical windows, but there's also an internet-connected app that's running it. And I challenge them, okay, what are the threats that exist in this particular thing? And only in my third example towards my last 25 minutes or so do I give them a high-level data flow diagram of a web application with a mobile app and microservices and some other juicy things that they can dig their teeth into. But what I've done is I've taken them into the real world where everybody has loads of threats when they're looking at the cottage. But by the time they get to the technological side, they can apply that learning that they've done, and they start to see things in the technology because they've got the framework down for, I just have to look for an issue, a thread that I can pull on along the way. So it's a lot of fun to do workshops like that, but that's how I recommend, even at the enterprise, it's the best way to approach it. Embrace Stride. So I have kind of my relationship with Stride is what I would describe as a love-hate-love relationship. So for those that know Stride, in the very beginning, I was like, when I first learned threat modeling, I'm like, this Stride thing is great, makes sense, it's simple, it's something that we can easily explain to people. Then the hate phase came around. You know what happened? I was like, it's too simple. It's too easy. No, it's not sophisticated enough. And then I started to try to get more sophisticated, and guess what? I came back to Stride because all I'm trying to do when we're trying to launch your enterprise-grade program is we're trying to get people to understand these things that we're trying to do. And by making it overly complicated, it just didn't work. And so I came back. Now I'm back to loving Stride. It's my best friend. Because it is so simple to say, hey, let's consider what the threats are to this. We've got spoofing, pretending to be someone you're not. Tampering, someone's modifying your data along the way. Repudiation, the only way I can think of to explain repudiation is to use Bart Simpson as an example. I didn't do it, nobody saw me do it, can't prove anything. That's repudiation. Mic drop, and I walk off the stage or whatever. So embrace Stride. I'm back to loving Stride. I think it's a good, solid foundation to start with. Yes, people are going to outgrow it, and that's great. I love the fact that people are going to outgrow it, and they're going to get more sophisticated as they become more knowledgeable about threats. And somebody asked me on another session yesterday, like, what are other sources for threats? When you get above Stride, and I said, there's a world of them. Common weakness enumeration from MITRE, CAPACT, common attack patterns from MITRE, attack. More of a red team pen testing perspective. If you got people that are like, hey, this is too simple, let them start chewing on those. I mean, there's CWEs, 1,000 entries of common weaknesses that happen in software. Start using that as your threat modeling base, and then you're starting to go to a whole other level. So tip number 7 here is adapt with the ASVS methodology. I'd like to say that I invented this, but I didn't. Somebody in the OWASP world used to call, what do they call it? Application security. It was a threat modeling thing, and like the last reference to it was like 2006 or something, but really all they were talking about was taking a requirement and kind of pointing it back towards the threat model. And so as I was reading that, I was like, I'm going to just call this the ASVS methodology. Because these are questions that I would ask at that whiteboard anyway. Like when someone draws their feature, one of the things I always ask is, okay, so how are you doing authentication on that feature? How are you handling administrators? Is there a separate login process for them? Is there a multi-factor? Like what's happening? And so all I did here is just took the high-level categories out of ASVS and said, let's start asking questions about these things in the threat modeling process. Because all too often we think threat modeling and requirements are two separate things. And you know what? They are not at all. They need to be interwoven with each other because there is not a threat that doesn't point back to a requirement somewhere. And so that's what I refer to as the ASVS methodology. But I think it's really about reverse engineering those threats or those requirements, turning them back into threats. It gives people another source if they don't want to dive into CWE or attack or something like that. It's another source. It's a great document, so well written. It's something that they can have a lot of success with. Okay, tip number 8: focus on the mitigations. Like that is key. I've said it like 5 times. I'll probably say it 2 more times before I finish here for me. Because that's really the true value that comes in the threat modeling process is the mitigations. And so what I did, I just took my Stride and my ASVS methodology and said, hey, what are some of the compensating controls that we can have here? This is high level stuff. That's okay. That's what threat modeling is about, right? We're not coding at this point. Sometimes we are, but we're trying to do this as a design time activity. Even in a DevOps world, you got to design. You can't just code something and then go, that's my design. I don't believe it. I mean, you might be able to do it, but I won't believe you. So spoofing, authentication, session management, this all points back to strong authentication with MFA, strong frameworks and libraries. There's nothing, I'm not creating anything new here, right? This is all old stuff that's been said a million times, but this is the key. This is what we're trying to get to, are those compensating controls when we do this. Why we do this whole thing, this whole process. And frameworks and libraries are really where it's at when you think about what's the best thing we can do to cancel as many threats as possible, at least in a web app world. Okay, so tip number 9, adopt the right tool sets at the right time. So to my earlier point, I don't want you to go buy a tool and say, now we're going to threat model, because it's not, you haven't taught anybody how to do it, right? It's like, hey, 15-and-a-half-year-old kid, I just bought you a car, jump in, go try and learn how to drive, right? It's not going to end well. Same thing here. So people always ask me what's my favorite tool, and I always half-jokingly say the whiteboard. But I really mean it. That's my favorite tool, even a virtual whiteboard or a in-person, on-the-wall whiteboard. Because it's just the collaboration that happens, looking people in the eye and kind of seeing, oh, that person's got something to say. Or, drawing people into the conversation in front of the whiteboard. That's my favorite tool. Microsoft has the threat modeling tool. If you've been around threat modeling, it's been here since the days of when you had to have a Visio license on your computer to run the threat modeling tool. I find that, I put it here, it's still worth taking a look at. If you're Windows/Azure centric, it's probably the best one that's out there, but I find that I tend to kind of drift away from it as soon as I get out of the Microsoft world. It's just me. Irius Risk is a commercial tool that I add on here, and look at that disclaimer at the bottom. I should have said it like in, no sponsorship occurred for any of these tool recommendations. This isn't, I don't have any interest in any of these things, right? This is just me as a practitioner going, when people ask me what tools they should look at, this is what I tell them to look at. So yeah, Irius Risk is a commercial tool. Stephen DeVries was one of the Threat Modeling Manifesto authors, who's the CEO of Irius Risk. I still like their tool. I think it's the best tool out there for, it does a good job of melding the requirements together, does a good job of giving you a drawing engine, a lot of really good templates, so you don't have to start from scratch on stuff, so I like it. And then in the OWASP world, I already mentioned PyTM, which I was a giant fan of, but now that I've actually used it, I'm even a bigger fan of it. And then OWASP also has ThreatDragon. So ThreatDragon is a web-based, there's a browser version, there's now a desktop version. It lets you draw data flow diagrams and then apply Stride to it, apply Linden, the privacy methodology. And the thing about ThreatDragon is it appeared to be dead about maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago, and now a couple other people have joined the project, and there's all this life and energy in it, and they're doing some really cool things. So it's a good tool to use as a starting point for a program. I would spend some time, like I said, teaching people the process, bringing them along. But if you don't have a giant budget, take a look at ThreatDragon as a potential enterprise solution to at least get you started and start to get to the point where you've got some results to show. PyTM is such a different approach that I don't know anybody that's doing threat modeling as code from a commercial perspective. But the PyTM, I can't speak enough about it. It's just it's fun to lay out how something's supposed to work in Python code and then watch diagrams come out of that. So you got to have the right tool sets at the right time for your enterprise program. And then the final tip I have here is threat model quality checks. So I guess I'm somebody who I see value in a community moving in a particular direction. I'm not somebody who's going to sit and start grading threat models, nor do I recommend that you do that. Because what happens if I grade somebody's threat model and I give them a D- on it? What are they going to do? They're going to be happy the next time they have to do a threat model. They're going to be like, nah, this thing's stupid. That's going to be their immediate reaction to what we're asking them to do. People are going to get better at threat modeling the more they do it. Okay, so we have to just acknowledge the fact that there's going to be sometimes we're going to look at a threat model, we're going to be like, oof, not how I would have done it, but they're moving in the right direction. There is a positive trajectory that we're on here as a group. So don't be judgmental or harsh. Think about the longer term play of this strong security culture. That's where you're trying to get to, right? Is when I think threat modeling, and was my approach at Cisco, how am I going to work myself out of a job in 5 years? where we don't need a threat modeling person anymore. Because developers are just sitting around going, yeah, of course we threat model. So that's what we do here. It's part of our design. Couldn't imagine doing it a different way. That's a world where we don't need a threat modeling coach anymore. But that's okay. Don't worry. There'll be a lot of other problems for us to solve. There's already 212 other problems we need to solve. So we're not going to work ourselves out of a job. We're just going to move to a different challenge where we can try to replicate the same idea. So when I'm doing a quality check, I'm saying, hey, did they follow the process that we've laid out? Was there any interesting threats that came out of it? Did they have mitigations applied? Did they document this correctly the way that we've specified that we need it to be done? And so, that's what I'm thinking about from a quality perspective. So there's my summary of all the tips. Having that solid process, embedding in your SDL well, bringing a diverse group of people to the table, having those coaches, using that workshop approach, embrace Stride. You can just stick with the love relationship with Stride. You don't have to try the hate one. I can tell you from experience that didn't work well. Use ASVS and some of those other things I talked about, CWE, CAPEC, MITRE ATT&CK. Use those for those that are a little further down the road. It's all about the mitigations, the tools, and then quality checks are something that can help us to grow the enterprise program and help people to get better at it. So yeah, we talked about the definition of threat modeling. We did this to inspire folks such as yourselves to get out there and improve your programs. That's the whole reason why we created this document in the beginning. You can use those values and principles to help drive your culture inside your program. Take those tips. Hopefully you'll have some good success with it. And like I end all of my threat modeling talks, threat model all the things. That's the challenge that I send you out to do. I should say teach everybody else to threat model all the things. But there's my some ways you can connect with me. There's the if you want to check out what Security Journey does as from a training perspective, we've got a free trial mentioned there. Check out the podcast. I also do something we call High Five, which is where I have a little bit of fun with the security news myself, some articles that catch my attention, and then I may add a little bit of snark in video form on top of it. There's my email address and Twitter handles and stuff, so I'd love to keep the conversation going. I'll talk about threat modeling 24/7 if people want to. But I am curious to see, does anybody have any questions? Okay, do we need a microphone for somebody asking a question, or are we just shouting? Good to go. All right, I'm going to start in the back because his hand was up really early.
Is it okay to have an endless sea of threat models, one for each feature, or how do you get those put back together so you have an integrated picture to the product?
You identify one of the big challenges of building a threat model for an entire system. So many people have tried to find ways to bring a bunch of smaller threat models back together into a super threat model, and many people have failed going down that road, myself included. And so what I really focus in on is all I care about is individual features. If we get to the point where we're threat modeling individual features, for one, we're going to build a group of people that are going to be able at some point to step back and say, now we're ready to threat model a bigger piece. Because one of the challenges I've seen in threat modeling is if we jump in and we say, let's threat model this whole application, we end up just spinning our wheels. People are like, I don't even understand what we're supposed to be doing. And then 6 months later, we just cancel it and stop doing it. But what I'm saying is if we get in the habit of threat modeling the smaller features further down the road, there'll be a time where we can look at them all together with some people that have really understood the process. So my guidance is really, and what I stick to is stick to the feature. If you stick to the features and you're hitting a good percentage of stuff that's coming out, you're going to be in a good place. Okay, I think there was another hand up here towards the front. Yes, please.
So I've sort of been tasked to look at threat modeling that's going on in our organization, and there's a lot of threat modeling on the asset side, including some of the infrastructure system development as well, and relating it to risk management and how to convey risk to executive leadership. And I think maybe that's a meta part of the puzzle. I'm not sure how to put that together.
Yeah, that is an interesting challenge to bridge two different worlds of engineering and kind of the more audit risk management side of the house. And I think, is there a reason that you have to get back to risk? Like why you can't take executives, kind of educate them about threats? Is it they already understand risk, or what's the motivation to have to convert it along the way?
I think because we do have a regular cadence of reporting on risk, and it's a good way for to get the message across.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my advice would be to, I mean, I think of threat and risk as very different things. You know, risk is the chance of something happening. Threat is the bad thing that's going to happen. That's how I approach it from an AppSec perspective. And so, yeah, I don't know that I don't really have any great advice for how to convert it. I would try to lead with the threat side of it, of like, let's understand here's all the bad things that can happen. And then maybe from a risk management perspective, you can then pull what's the chance of these bad things happening and stuff from more of an engineering perspective. But yeah, it's an interesting challenge. I think you have a conference talk for next year at LastCon, I recommend. How to meld together risk and threat in a big company. I think there was another hand behind right here first, then I'll come back over here. Yes? Oh, last one. I got my last call. And I'll be available out in the hallway too, so I'll be in the hallway.
Just to go on Miriam, as far as that, I would see from the executives that you would use Stride. You would use your Stride classification to quantify, because they want to quantify like the potential risk so that they can understand their threat landscape.
Okay.
So when you got that Stride and you know after you do your diligence and your threat modeling and you relate it, then your executive leadership is relatable risk. It becomes true. It's just like, is it actually something that could potentially be real? Because then that helps the leadership prioritize it. So once you do the threat modeling, you can join it with the risk factors and then quantify it. So then you have your threat landscape, and that helps the executives understand if they're going to be charged or lose some money or lose some data or something like that, and then it helps them put money or prioritize, mitigate your threat landscape. So when I use Stride all the time, old school dread. So when you use that and you let them know, hey, look, it's repeatable.
Yeah.
It is repeatable, and it's like, it's easy. Somebody without a tool can do it because I'll show them.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And executives want to get back to the money, right? At the end of the day, that's what they're concerned with. That was good. So thanks everybody. I'll be out in the hallway right outside the doors here. So if you want to keep talking about threat modeling, I got a few more hours. So thank you very much.